In the last episode of Build, we talked about how we want to transition into a new career, but we often get stuck in a role because we might have some experience that we're missing or a skills gap. If you missed that episode, I've included a link to it below this video. In today's episode, we're going to continue our conversation and share some more concrete strategies for how you can go about making that career transition happen. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, the show that debunks a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In today's episode, we're going to share some best practices when it comes to advocating for yourself as you go through a career transition. And to help us out, I've invited Amy Sunback, who is a partner at Sequoia Capital, a venture capital firm. Prior to being a venture capitalist, Amy has held roles as a product manager, product marketer, as well as a snowboarding instructor. Thanks for joining us again, Amy.
Thank you for having me again.
So last time we were chatting, you had mentioned the number of career transitions you've had. What I would love to learn is, as you were making each transition, how you feel you advocated for yourself during those transitions.
In my first role out of school was in product marketing at Microsoft. I was working on Windows and Surface, and from there I actually switched jobs. I applied for a job at a different company. The advocating part of it was that I was a good fit for this job, even though it was a growth marketing manager at Uber. And I would say it was less advocating for myself in that I was a good fit because it was a similar type of role, but more it was just I was a good fit for this company at this time, building this product. While I was a growth marketing manager at Uber, the team was growing really, really quickly. The company was growing really quickly. This is like 2014, so like peak growth for Uber. I had the opportunity to switch into product management, and I had decided that this was the career path that I would rather embark on. And there was a lot of internal advocating that I had to do to convince the team to trust me to be a PM when I really only had marketing experience up until now in terms of at least bullets on my resume, and that I did not actually have a engineering degree, which was a requirement actually at the time for a lot of other product management jobs. So there was that part of that transition. I was a PM on various different teams, actually a few quite technical on the sort of data product side, and then I actually was also a PM at Facebook after Uber, and then I switched into venture capital, where I would say there was some advocating that I had to do as well to convince the investors that I would also be a good investor, in addition to having a product, being able to think about product.
So I want to dive in a little bit deeper into each of these transitions. But before we do, I know one of the things that we talked about last time was having a skills gap. And how did you go about filling those in? I know you gave some examples last time around doing some homework or going to a hackathon. Do you have some others you would like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think really understanding what the skill gaps are, or like what the perception is about the role, and like kind of where you are versus like where the candidates that they're looking for are in terms of skills is really important. And so, for example, on the product side, having experience, I would say the two skill gaps that I really had there was being able to be technical and work closely with engineering and have engineers trust you. And also in terms of as a PM, like being able to present to leadership and winning the trust of leadership were the two areas where I personally felt that I had a skills gap. Of course, for others transitioning to different roles, they might be different too, but just knowing where your weaknesses are is important, and then doing everything you can to fill that skill Yeah, so it could be anything, and it's really different for the skill. But I found that what was helpful for me was just learning about how each of the products at the company was built, like what the architecture is, like what do all of these things mean, how does it work, and luckily I had a lot of friends in engineering that were willing to, hang out with me, grab them a drink, and they'd actually just explain it to me and like draw out all the systems diagrams and understand like why we came to certain architecture decisions, like what were the big projects that were underway today and how it worked, and also walk me through the process of like building a feature or product from the ground up and like what that process even looked like. So being able to understand that and then have those conversations with designers too, like how from, idea to like what the UX, like how we decide what features to build and like what the design even looks like, just understanding that process end to end was super, super helpful. And I would just do that, in my free time, just to understand what the job is. Because it's actually kind of interesting because when you're thinking about applying for a role, a complete new role, like transitioning into a completely new role, and it's really hard to get experience doing that role, short of getting it, right? And so just in your free time, just understanding deeply like what the role is and where you don't have experience and just filling that out so that you have a really comprehensive understanding of what you're getting yourself into is really, really useful. So that's like, and then in terms of the leadership part, that's actually a much harder skill to develop. And I think that when I started in the role as well, it's something that you can only slowly develop over time, getting confidence with yourself, but also just you can take on like various like sort of opportunities outside of work too, like whether that's like leading a nonprofit or starting your own initiative. And I feel like this is relevant for the product manager role in particular, where you're kind of rallying a team together of like very different people in order to achieve something, whether that's organizing events, being involved in your local community, like building something like a nonprofit, building like a side project that something that you're passionate about, and through that experience, it's actually like quite similar to rallying a team together to build a product.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I do agree that having some hobby or outside work, I think, is really helpful. One thing I noticed as you were talking is you mentioned how you also spoke to designers as well as engineers to find out what their day-to-day is like. So I'm curious, as you were advocating for yourself in the product marketer role or the product manager role, how helpful it was to gain some insight into people that you'd be interfacing with, like other roles.
Extremely, extremely useful because as a product manager, you're actually kind of the glue that holds the team together. And it's an interesting balance because you're not actually like, no one is reporting to you, but you kind of have to guide a team into a desired outcome, and that involves like interfacing with many different teams, from research to data science, design to engineering, to other product teams, to leadership, to business development and marketing and everything like that, and just understanding like what each of the teams really expects from the product manager and like what makes a great one versus someone where things were confusing or like it didn't, like the process didn't go smoothly, and just understanding like what is expected is really, really helpful.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the transitions between companies and within one, because you have done both of them. Let's start the first being the transition between companies, and then let's talk a little bit about transitioning within the same one.
Sounds great.
Mm-hmm. So for yourself, when you were transitioning from one company to the other within the same role, what did that look like for you? Maybe you can give us the example of Facebook, like you mentioned, going from being a product manager at Uber to a product manager at Facebook.
That was actually pretty straightforward because the expectations for a product manager are pretty similar across these two companies.
Okay.
But the area of focus was actually quite different. So I was working on pretty data-driven products while I was at Uber, whether that was related to growth or, marketplace pricing or subscriptions. And at Facebook, I was interviewing for a role where I would be dealing solely with like self-expression and engagement. It was camera, stories, augmented reality, and it was an area that I had not had any product experience before. So the way that I would advocate for that was just my generalist experience as a product manager and just like setting goals, like principles for the team, like communications, like all of these like other skills would translate to any product team, even if I had if I did not have a lot of experience in that particular product. And I think I was lucky in that Facebook was looks for more generalist product managers as a whole across the organization, because just there is a lot of like movement within the company. You see people, the company changes, the company grows, and people do move from different orgs quite often. In other companies, that's not the case. Like, for example, you might, one company might be looking specifically for a product manager that has experiences with financial services or experience with like transportation or like something very, very specific, or like machine learning. But I was able to advocate that the generalist skills around product management were very translatable from one company to another.
Yeah. And how did you find this information out? Was this asking the recruiter, asking the hiring manager, or maybe talking to some of your friends who were already product managers at Facebook? How do you figure out what the company is looking for in a particular role?
Yeah, this was actually sort of communicated to me throughout the whole process from the hiring manager and whatnot. But even if that's not communicated directly, if you find that your best angle is to argue or to advocate that the generalist, sort of that you as a generalist and your ability to like set goals and to just build teams and to like ship products quickly and to deliver results is like the most valuable thing that you bring to the table, and that is actually more valuable than like very specific product related experience, then I think that just taking the initiative to even if it like wasn't something that they've explicitly said, can be really helpful too.
Yeah. So let's switch gears and talk about making a transition within a company, because I know a lot of times, like you had mentioned in the last episode, there is the ability to see what this other role looks like. You're interacting with your peers, or you might have done a project with them, or maybe you're just like curious as to, hey, I've seen so-and-so do this. I think I would be great for this role. However, there is a little bit of that stigma of like, well, at this company, you're an engineer, you're a really great engineer, or, in your case, you're a really great product marketer. So we don't know if like product management is going to be your forte. You haven't done it before. We're not really sure what the role is, or maybe they do have a definition, but there's still a little bit of that stigma because you've been somebody else. You've done something else. Maybe you can walk us through what that transition looks like within a company.
Yeah, absolutely. So some companies do have formal like processes to change roles internally, but most don't. And I actually find that most companies will give you significant amounts of pushback if you're looking to transition from one role to another, especially if it's a non-technical role into a technical role. And my story wasn't that different. I think you do need to be a strong advocate for yourself and tell people that you actually do want this, because it's not going to present itself otherwise. The opportunity, it's just like if you're, say you're like a BD rep and you're like, I want to be a PM, like that opportunity won't just present itself one day. And then you can just like jump into it. You kind of have to believe that you want it and then tell people that you want it. And sometimes you'll get pushback, but even if you do, you kind of have to continue to fight for it. If you do really believe that that's the path that you want to go down. And I would say, even if there isn't a process, you kind of have to make the process yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Maybe you can walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah, and this is going to look different at every single company. But basically, what you need to do is convince the people around you that you would be just as good at the new role as you are in your current role, which is, hard.
Right. Easier said than done.
It's easier said than done. And you need to give people the confidence around you. Because I've actually seen a lot of people kind of get stuck in the process of transitioning from one role to the other, where their manager will say, maybe in the next 6 months, like you can think about this role, and then the next 6 months, and then it's like a year, and you really haven't made progress. So really advocating for yourself, doing the role, like doing things on the side to give people confidence that you can really do this role, so that such that when the conversation isn't just, hi, I'm a marketer and I really want to be a product manager. And because I think I would be good at this job, that's a much weaker way to have the conversation than, I'm a marketer, I want to be a product manager, and look at all of these products that I've shipped, built landing pages from scratch, I communicated with engineering, can talk to these engineers who said that I led a good process. I was a winner in this hackathon and XYZ. And you can put that package of things together and just present a really good case for yourself. So I do think that in the absence of a formal process in your company, you have to kind of do something like that in order to make it happen. And I guess how you do it is more like finding the right opportunities and without detracting from your day job, right? Yeah. You have to make sure you're not doing a mediocre job at your current job, but there's always I would say there's usually things that you can do either, like if there are sort of projects that you can organize in your spare time to like volunteer for and get more experience that way at your work, or even outside of work if you just like don't have the capacity in your day to day to organize something on the side, whether that's like a hackathon project or like. Or like I mentioned, a nonprofit or something like that.
Right.
Just to show people that you can, that you actually could do a good job in the role, and that's also helpful for yourself as well, and that you get some experience, and then you understand like whether this is something that you would enjoy doing day in and day out.
Yeah. And you mentioned before trial periods. Do you think it's good to even bring that up as something you're open to, or would you say no, just like ask for the full job?
I think trial periods are definitely a necessary step for yourself and for the organization. For yourself, because it'd be the first time you're doing it as a full-time job. Yeah. And some people do realize that it wasn't what they thought it would be, and that's just a good way to just understand without taking the full risk of jumping in. And it also is probably an easier thing to ask for from your manager or the company. Like, let me try this for 6 months. If I'm doing great, like, let's make sure you move forward. But I think clearly understanding what happens after the trial period and what the trial period is important, because otherwise you might be stuck in a really, really long trial period. After the trial period is over, there's not a clear next step. So if it's not a formal thing at the company, just making sure you establish clearly, like, the beginning, the end, like what the expectations are and like how you will be evaluated afterwards.
No, I think that's great. So having a set of criteria, time boxing the trial, and essentially giving people like, hey, here's a way to grade me, or we'll decide what the grade is, so that it's clear at the end and there's no room to sort of be like, she was like a C+ product manager, but we really like her being an A+ engineer, right? It's kind of like you need to get an A+ in both, and then you get to decide which one you want to be. No, I think that's good. So let's talk about your most recent transition from being a product manager into a venture capitalist. First of all, what brought on this desire to even do the transition?
So this one was a little bit of a surprise in terms of like my career, and it wasn't something I had been planning. So my background was in growth, product, marketing, and I actually got Sequoia actually reached out to me saying, and this was kind of what I mentioned in the last episode of being a culmination of like all the experiences you've ever had, and they were actually looking for someone with growth and marketing experience and product experience to join the growth investing team. And they reached out, and that was a bit of a surprise. And I think this is also kind of relevant to like just keeping an open mind of like what is out there. And so I ended up having coffee with a few of the investors. And through that process, I was able to learn more about what investing, what venture capital was really all about, and learning more about just the team and how they think about the investments they make, and company building, and really like solving the most important problems of our generation by backing the founders that are working on those problems. And it was through that process that I got really interested in the job, just because I had never really learned about it deeply before. And through the process of meeting all the investors and learning about the process and everything in the industry, that was it became really exciting to me. And it was just a super unplanned, but super like exciting opportunity that I thought I would take a chance and make the transition.
Yeah. And for yourself, there is a very steep learning curve when you're switching into venture capital. So did you have any like mentors or sponsors? How did you go about acquiring the skills to feel like, okay, I know people believe I can do this, but I need to believe that I could do this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the learning curve was extremely steep because I had never really been an investor before. And that the process of like building a career there is very, very different than like building a career in product. So there was just a lot of skills I definitely felt like I didn't have. And I read a whole bunch of investing books. I did these workbooks, and I also, met with a bunch of my friends who are in the industry, and just about like what are the skills that are important to have in this role? What does success look like? What am I missing? And I'm still learning, I would say. And it's like a constant learning process. Really lucky that the team at Sequoia is just super, super helpful and kind and willing to, both take a chance on me and sort of help me grow along the way, and sort of teach me about the ins and outs of, how the job works and kind of what we look for. But definitely is a constant learning experience. And I kind of felt like I was kind of starting from day one all over again, when in terms of jumping into a role where, didn't really feel like I had the experience. But it's been a really fun journey along the way.
Yeah. So last question for you, and this might be a bit of a meaty one. I know a lot of times people will advocate for themselves, either in their existing company or in a new company. They're very excited about the role. They've done some of the homework. They know that this is the next step for them. And for whatever reason, it doesn't happen the first time around. And maybe it doesn't even happen the second time around or even the third time around. So I'd be curious to hear from you, level of patience as well as time it takes to do some of these transitions. Maybe you can shed some light into that.
Yeah, I definitely think that persistence and like belief in yourself is really, really important. And to just think of every setback as a learning opportunity. So why didn't it work out the first time? And like, what can you do better the second time? And really like building that conviction that this is the career that you want, and just like the ability to like find that persistence within yourself, right? Yeah, because it like really wanting something and having it not work out is like a really, really challenging experience to go through, right? It's really tough. It's emotionally challenging, especially, if you've planned something like out in your head and then all of a sudden things didn't work out the way that you wanted to work out. But I think just constantly keeping, an open mind as a learning opportunity, being like, okay, this first attempt didn't work out. Like, what can I learn from this? Like, what did I not do as well? And like, what can I do to make sure that my next attempt is more successful?
Yeah.
It's really, really important. But also keeping an open mind as to is this the only path that I can take? Like, for example, if you're like a marketer internally and you want to transition into product, but you're just hitting wall after wall and roadblock after roadblock, maybe explore, like, think of all of the options for you to get into your desired place. Like, maybe it's looking for a role at a different company. Maybe it's joining a startup. I think joining a startup is actually a really interesting way to think about transition. And I think that's, I joined Uber when it was still a startup, I would say, is because everyone has to wear so many hats that you kind of have the opportunity to explore a lot of different roles. So say, like, if you're at a very large company where, like, the teams are super siloed and there's like a ton of process and bureaucracy to actually switch roles, and you're hitting roadblock after roadblock, you're doing trials, it's not working out, you're trying to advocate for yourself, but then they're like, oh, you just don't have the requirements necessary in order to transition, maybe consider switching to a different company into that role that you want. And advocating yourself there, or joining a startup where you can wear a lot of hats and eventually ending up in the role that you want. And I think there's just, like, a lot of different options. So both, like, keeping an open mind in order to stay persistent, as well as keeping an open mind as to what the path looks like to get to where you want to go.
Right. And in terms of awareness, I know a lot of times it's hard to get that feedback from the recruiter or from whoever we interviewed with. So do you have like one last tip? I know I said that was the last question, but I snuck in another one. Do you have a tip for how you can kind of build that awareness so that when you leave the interview, you kind of know, okay, I read the room, or I have a sense of what I did well or what I didn't, or any, like, role-playing exercises? What would you suggest to people to kind of build that awareness?
I would say after the interview is over, ask for feedback from your interviewers, even if you did well, or if you did poorly, not did poorly, but if you didn't get the role, you just ask for feedback. I would say most of the time people are pretty open to giving it, but sometimes, they never respond to your email, in which case I would suggest finding someone who is in the role that you were interviewing for and doing, like, practice interviews with that and asking for their feedback, especially if they're your friends. They're much more likely to be very candid, being like, you just were not clear in stating the problem, or you went down this tangent. I would say, like, if you are looking to be, like, a product manager or VC or something like that, you might know some people that are in the role that and where they actually interview a lot of candidates. So being able to, like, go through, like, a fake interview with them, a mock interview, and getting feedback there will be, I feel, almost more helpful in terms of getting constructive feedback than trying to, like, pull it out of the people who you interviewed with who are very busy. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Well, thank you for sharing all of these tips, Amy, with us, and for coming on the show today. How can people get in touch with you if they have questions that they want to ask you?
Feel free to shoot me an email. My email is Amy, AMY, @sequoiacap.com. So feel free to email me anytime, or add me on LinkedIn, or follow me on Twitter. I respond to all of these channels.
That's it for today's episode of Build. Be sure to share this episode with anyone close to you who is considering a career transition, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive the next episode. Ciao for now. Build is brought to you by amazing patrons. Our platinum patrons are Andrea Goulet, CEO and co-founder of Corgi Bites; Charbel Saman, founder of Sprintwell; Dee Gill, founder of Chime On; Jamie Hand; and Lauren Hassan, CEO and founder of Developer, as well as the following patrons. If you'd like to join them and support Build, please visit patreon.com/build. In exchange for your support, you'll receive perks like advanced copies of our books from authors highlighted on the show, special pricing on upcoming FemJunior courses, and more.